Uh, well, I just noticed a spelling mistake. Yeah. Okay, and so based on my old video, I felt that I didn't formulate the social boundaries clearer, and also felt the need to take a cursory glance at the ethical and communal implications of the theory. Yeah, mostly because I feel like I'm really onto something here. So just quick definitions and implications. I think that having a personal sphere carries the implications of a need to individuate and mature, right? And so being communal minded, or accepting that human beings are social animals and you're totally dependent and have an obligation to your broader group, to your tribe, to your clan, to your family, that doesn't eliminate the need for individuation, right? And the need for maturity, because that's the only way you will be able to contribute to the group. In a hive, a bee has to become a queen or a worker, or in a termite. Termites don't have that. In a termite's nest, some have to become soldiers, some have to become workers, some have to become whatever else. So the function is needed. So it's true that we do have a need to individuate, to mature, to develop our skills, develop our virtue, and it also means that we do have an obligation to extend care and protect our blood and kin, right? Like it's also instantiated, like with a herd of elephants, so in a pack of wolves, school of killer whales and dolphins. So you see, they do gather resources together, get food, clothing, shelter. Like they cooperate, they work together, gathering resources for what they need, right? And you can also say you need an obligation to contribute to your community, right? The notion of the citizen, right? The notion of the city. That bond of loyalty and cooperation for security, for protection. A lot of times in the text, you notice that cities are like being in the city was a thing of safety. So it's that alliance for protection, against threats. And also you have an obligation to your fellow man, right? If you actually, mostly when thinking about reflecting on religion, the whole notion of an ultimate concern, an end, a telos, right? A telos for our entire species, and the telos of all the species, actually. So it's an idea I find communicated strangely in the book of Genesis in the Bible. So those are some of the things I've been reflecting on and building on, right? And so I also think that there is an embodiment, right? Like for the personal, I think the paragon of virtue, or the master of the discipline, is the embodiment of proper individuation, right? And in the private, I think it's the father or the husband, contrasted with the mother and the wife. I think that they're complementary, right? And in the city, you have the prince and the warrior, complemented by the queen. But I do not know if there is a something analogous to a warrior, right? Is there like, if we take warrior to be male, is there an analogous version for the female? I do not know, right? Maybe protector, but I'm still thinking through that. I do not know how that to mirror. And the universal also is the shepherd or the bishop, right? The custodian of the ultimate values, right? The universal way, truth, goodness, beauty, right? And so I think sometime in the future, that I'm reflecting through this, I would make a video on each node, right? The ethical implications of each node. Mostly I was even thinking about, like, when you read Psalm 23, and you think about the notion of the shepherd or the bishop, and also the universe, and you think about mankind, and the whole idea of, like, the shepherd or the elder or the bishop, right? I'm borrowing heavily from the Bible. The Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want. He leads me down to green pastures, still waters, restoring your soul, leading the path of righteousness for His name's sake, fearing no evil, knowing that you are not alone, like, comfort, right? prosperity in the presence of your enemies. So that there's many things. If I just particularly think about in Guy Standing's book, the Precariat, New Dangerous Class. So when you think about the plight of the precariat and you look about the role of the bishop or the elder, you find that there is a lot of mirroring. Like the solution will be there. Yeah. So that's for another day. And also, in light of imitating some of my intellectual heroes, I was just going to borrow from the Greek to represent the same ideas, right? To kind of codify them into a concept or an idea. Like you said, the personal, the private. So I think like the first thing is the paraklesis, the calling. In the book of Luke, talking about how Jesus grew in stature and in wisdom and with favor with God and with man, right? So that's somebody who is all-rounded, who's maturing quite well. And then if you think about the oikos, the home, was drawing from Adam and Eve, right? Still extending the whole embodiment image, in that the Christ is the pinnacle of the personal, right? And Adam and Eve being the foundation of the home. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And I think the classical example I could find of the polis is Athens and Sparta. The whole notion of a culture, a community, a tribe, a religion, right? And ecclesia, I think, is assembly of mankind, and I think is best embodied by the church. Upon reading the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, watching videos of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, comparing just different, attending some Buddhist meetings, learning a bit about the sutras. I think the best picture, even comparing with like books like After Virtue, right? I think the best embodiment of ecclesia is the church, right? The Christian notion of the church, and not like the denominations like Catholic or Protestant or Orthodox, but rather the entire body. How I think it's the book of Hebrews, like this cloud of witnesses with a common telos, right? I think, so that's why I think the church embodies ecclesia, assembly of mankind. And still keeping up with the same symbolism, right? Where like the development of grace and the spirit, if I'm borrowing from Spengler, right? That seed culture into the high culture, right? The Rome, the end, right? The mature form of the thing. I think that the paraklesis grows into perfectum, right? The oikos grows into the gens, and the polis grows into the regnum, right? The kingdom. And the ecclesia still grows into the ecclesia, right? Only that, the same time, I think it shows also that borrowing, right? The Greek to the Latin. And I think also that will be drawing also the idea of a local church to general church, and that as you build that local church and you work to establish it and you contribute to it, if all of you are doing so, it then extends, and you find that all those networks end up joining into this one gigantic node, right? So it's like a weird hive mind thing. And just some cool stuff that I drawing from this intuition, and now I was trying to see if there's a connection between this intuition and tradition, right? And since I was conceiving of the church as the embodiment of the universal, and considering that the Bible is a book that you have, like 3 languages, right, written over thousands of years, over 40 different authors, and having a unity of subject, so I felt like there's certain mirrors or parallels I found that matches it, right? And so, like the whole idea of individuating, right? First, like God's conversation with Cain, right, the first murderer. When he tells him that, why are you angry, right? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? If you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door, it desires to have you, but you must rule over it, right? And so, it's like God is telling Cain he has an obligation to rule over himself, right? To have master over his visceral side and over his rational side. And I think it's even that whole idea of individuating, growing, uplift, right? The whole idea that this beast presents the whole part of the one of the important key ideas to the right wing is the choosing of uplift over comfort, right? And here I think is the whole idea of uplift being captured, and then it's being tied to having a personal responsibility, right? Especially if you're an adult, in that children don't have the capacity, but the adult now, when you're adult, you take over parenting yourself. And also the whole idea when Jesus is speaking in Matthew 5:48, and he tells that the people should be perfect in the sense of mature, complete, reaching the end, right? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. And the idea of the home being embodied in both in the Old and the New Testament. You also notice that's the pattern I've taken with both. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to the wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And Jesus also cemented the same idea. Someone was describing divorce, like when he noticed all this notion of establishing a home, he says, "What God has put together, let no man put asunder." Right. So that feels like tradition also supporting the notion of the oikos and a certain boundary to it, right? In that you rule over sin, right? You do what is right. So that's personal, and let no man, nobody should interfere with what God has put together, right? Two becoming one flesh, leaving your father and mother. So that notion seems to also be demarcating a boundary, right? And also in Genesis 1:28, right? When after God creates man, essentially one of the interesting ideas I found in Genesis 1 is the notion of the cosmos, creation as this grand cosmic temple, and with humanity as its priesthood, right? And he tells humanity that he blesses them and he tells them to be fruitful and to multiply, to fill the earth and to subdue it, right? To rule over the fish of the seas, the birds of the air, and the creatures of the land, right? And also in Acts 17, right, when Paul is speaking to Athens, right, to the Athenians and the Areopagus, and he talks about how God, from one man, God made all the nations of men. So I think this is still capturing the idea of the polis, right? That feeling the earth spreading out. Because how human beings, what's the process, right? You have children, the group grows, it becomes too large to be in one place. Then some of the group have to migrate and they take over another territory, right? In another place. And after a while, they become culturally distinct as they're dealing with their survival, right? Implementing these ultimate principles, right? Tradition with the capital T. Truth, goodness, beauty, virtue, right? When you start now applying those to your environmental context. And I think that's how you end up with a good culture that is different from each other. And while I'm still sorting through about the relationship between cultural differences and biological differences and what's the nature of race, right? Still thinking through those things. But I still think here you find that whole notion of a separation in terms of like a community, right? Cooperating one another and having territory, boundaries of their land, right? And that whole brotherhood of mankind still ties into these ideas, and you also notice like this extending in that the universal, was it Jonathan Peugeot, when he talked about in the Beatitudes how Christ is presented as God filling in the cosmos, right? From the light to the darkness, every part of it. I also think that the universal, the birth of mankind, also stands from the personal all the way down to the church, right? Which I'm terming as the universal. And Jesus is talking about how all authority in heaven and earth has been given to him, right? And he tells his disciples, his apostles, right, his sent ones, and now I'm sending you to go into all nations, right? And make disciples of all men and teach them to follow all that I've observed. So I think that is communicating the whole notion of a universal value system, a universal telos, an end for the species, right? And also in Ezekiel 38, how God is talking about how he'll reveal himself to the nations, right? And so despite having that distinction, that distinctness, that notion of the city or the kingdom, right, or the local community or the wider community, there's still that common telos, that universal concern that religion tries to capture, right? And that's why I think that the religion side tries to encode, like the institution of religion is actually trying to capture that telos, that end for the species, that which we have to accomplish as a brotherhood of mankind, which is distinct from that which we have to accomplish as a community, which I think is security, and as a family, which I think is provision, and as a person, which I think is virtue. And so that I think would extend a bit. So yeah, so that's me taking the kind of hoping that I made the social boundaries a little clearer, right? And looked a little bit at some of the ethical and communal implications, right? And I hope this would kind of inspire you, right? And encourage you to better yourself, right? That's the whole notion of individuating, right? To reach for virtue. And perhaps if you are feeling a bit discouraged or dejected and worn down by the horrors and the evil of this world, perhaps this might help give you a little bit of direction, a little bit of hope, right? A little bit of a conceptual framework, right? Where to draw the line. So that's all I have to do today.